This channel is supported by Truefire.
Well, what is this all about then? It's the Truefire Summer Music Festival. What I'm going to tell you about, you can get 1 month of all access for just $1. The all access, you can dip in and out of every single course on Truefire, so that's a really great way to get some awesome courses down you.
So, I played a 53 Les Paul gold top the other day. I didn't get any footage of that. I did get some footage of playing this ES335. From this was like early 60s, and I noticed one thing about these guitars. These belong to Ed Alesko, part of the Tone Twins, and he's got a studio in Wales and loads of vintage guitars, and he writes for guitar. There was one thing I noticed about this that I've not really seen many people talk about, which is kind of a big deviation from how they are built today. That is, simply put, the radius was definitely not 12 inches. And not really that close to 12 inches. And I thought, how come I've not really seen many people talking about it? So I started Googling it. I started to find that still not that many people talk about this for some reason. I asked my buddy Keith from 5 Watt World what the radius on these vintage guitars would be, and he said 12 inch. That seems to be what the literature and all that sort of stuff says. But when I get that guitar in my hands, it's most definitely not 12 inch. Because you see what a 12 inch radius looks like versus it is kind of flat. My buddy Jake Loosemore, he's played a few, and he's actually said, you know, there was one in particular, I think it was Ed King's Les Paul that he played, that was particularly flat, and then he played another one that was, again, more like this 10 inch radius. So what is going on there? And maybe this is a little bit of a secret to a guitar which actually plays a little bit more like a vintage instrument. But this guitar here belongs to Francisco, great player, and also had a 57, I think, ES type guitar. And we got out a radius gauge for that. And this is what we kind of found. That's the 12.
This is the 12, but yeah, this is less than 12, yeah.
A lot less. And then also we had a Norlin Era Les Paul, and we put a radius gauge on that. And again, we found even a Norlin Era Les Paul doesn't seem to be 12-inch radius.
Yeah, I see a lot less of a gap there.
So this is Norlin Era.
Norlin, yeah. Oh, it looks close as well. I'm not so sure.
It's probably 10 as well, isn't it?
Might have been, yeah.
So, I don't know what exactly is going on there. And I have not got a sample size enough to have really any knowledge on this sort of thing at all, obviously. And I'm definitely not an expert on any of this. Again, you know that, I know that. But it's one of those things that I've just not seen, you know, people talk about how different these guitars are. But when you get into the specifics of it, it's like, okay, well, one of these might have Brazilian rosewood, or, you know, it's older wood and that sort of stuff. But a real physical thing that is kind of obvious if you do actually see it, because it's like, well, that looks like quite a round fretboard. If you look at like a Murphy Lab or a modern type Les Paul, the fretboards look pretty flat. Like, honestly, I think you definitely spot it, is what I'm thinking. So again, it's one of those things where I wonder why I've not heard someone like Tom Bukovac, maybe I've just not watched enough videos, say that sort of thing. The other thing that I did notice was it looks to me like the dots on these older guitars are in a slightly different kind of position. They're like, to my eye, when I was playing both the ES335 and also I kind of noticed it on this SG, the dots to me look like they're a bit further along the fret that way than fully center. And I don't know if that's just a trick of the eye or something, but that was one of the immediate things that I sort of also felt like I was seeing when I was playing the guitars. It's like these dots are not exactly central to the fret, which is kind of sort of charming and stuff like that, but equally not something that I've ever really noticed anyone else mention. So yeah, I will say that gold top Les Paul felt incredible to play, and it was the 53s, I think, are the sorts of things that get converted into these things called burst conversions and all that, and I think it's a real shame, because that was a fantastic playing and sounding guitar. It had just the wraparound bridge. I think that was a non-standard one because it had like a compensation part on it, or it's slightly later 53. I don't know exactly which. I mean, Ed will tell you. And it had a headstock break that had been repaired. Now, I would also say that I don't think a headstock break would any longer be a thing that would put me off playing a guitar, if you know what I mean. Because when I was playing that guitar, it just felt amazing, felt fantastic to play. And also, you know, the Les Paul Greenie, that had a split along the headstock, right? But anyway, these are just little bits and pieces that, you know, I've not really heard anyone else mention. Of course, one of the things that people say about these vintage guitars, so this is a Norlin Era, I'll do a video on this as well, is that modern guitars are more consistent. And I guess one way you could take that, you know, what does that really mean? I guess in some ways, less character, more uniform, you know, these kind of things. But that could be part of why the radius on these ones seem to me to be less than 12, to this one closer to 10. Maybe it's because, you know, at this time in the factory, whatever they were doing to create these radii, which I'm not exactly sure either. I can't find anything specific about how, like, you would radius a guitar fretboard at this stage. By this time in, you know, modern guitar manufacturing, it'll all be done by CNC, right? So they would be very, very consistent. But at this era, I think they were not. But I did see that there was one guy that left a comment on a forum saying that he'd refretted hundreds of vintage Gibsons and their 10-inch radius was actually the thing that he'd found on most of them. Again, I'd love to see someone building more Les Pauls with this type of radius. I think one of the things that I did find people were quoting, saying that someone had said the magic was about having a 12-inch radius here and a 10-inch radius on the actual neck, a Gibson It's Vintage kind of feel. Again, let me know in the comments if you've heard this before or found a source for this kind of information, because, as I say, my sample size is small, but most definitely what I would say is that these guitars were not 12-inch radius uniformly, the ones that I've seen. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Cheers for stopping by.